Can Jerome Tang get another All-American performance out of PJ Haggerty? His job just might depend on it.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host for today's show, Andy Patton, joined by Christian Rao of Locked On Kansas State. So excited to get into our Kansas State team preview today. You are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day of the week. Want to give a special shout out to our everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College, folks, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Well, like we said, it is number 21 in our team preview series here. Hoping to get, I think, 30, 35 or so on the schedule before now in the start of the college basketball season as we are inching closer and closer to October. Today, Christian and I are talking about Kansas State, Jerome Tang, and the Cats in Little Manhattan. We're talking about last year's struggles, very streaky team last year for the Wildcats. We're also going to talk about their reloaded roster, 10 newcomers coming in, including All-American guard PJ Haggerty. We'll talk about what that means for this team, how this starting lineup might shake out. We'll close out the show with some predictions on how this team will do in the Big 12 and what it might mean for Coach Tang's job security. Christian, let's start there. Last year, this team ultimately finished right around 500. They were 16-17 overall. They were 9-11 in the Big 12, but it was really a season of runs. We saw this team struggle in the non-conference, lose a handful of games in a row, including some games they probably should not have lost to Drake and to Wichita State, lost to Liberty, open up conference play starting 1-6 with 6 straight losses after that win, but then they rattle off 6 wins in a row, then they lose 4 straight games. It was just very, very up and down year for this team before ultimately losing to Baylor in the Big 12 tournament and not getting a chance to compete in the NCAA tournament. It was a whirlwind of a year for Kansas State last year. Christian, what are your kind of thoughts looking back on it now with a little bit of space between last season and now?
Yeah, it's hilarious. You returning me back to those memories, PTSD kind of flowing right through myself after, covering that season last year. It was a fun season to cover, but very frustrating season. You nailed it on talking about peaks and valleys, ups and downs with this team. That's exactly how it felt like. And it all started at the beginning of the season with the sluggish non-conference start. Just couldn't really get anything going. And I think there was just so much expectations because you were seen as one of this top transfer portal class. And many of the media markets are saying, because all the money you spent on bringing in guys like Coleman Hawkins, and the expectations were most definitely there about needing to get this team back to the tournament because you missed it the year prior. Now you've missed it 2 years in a row. And those expectations, let me tell you, are there for sure. But you brought in these buzzwords, and that's what really was like the main narrative of the story, trying to bring in buy-in and culture. And you even compared yourself to trying to get to this Houston model of having retention on your roster, which is hysterical to look back now because you mentioned 10 newcomers on the team. But looking back to last year, there were some upsides, there were some downsides. You saw some good things from some of the players that are still there. And of course, you got to win in Ames against Iowa State, which is definitely the highlight of the season. But got to start off stronger this year if Jerome Tang is going to stick around and hopefully continue building this program the way that he started the season, or started his career at Kansas State with an LD.
Yeah, life comes at you fast. And for Jerome Tang, 2 years ago, he's a candidate to take that job over at Arkansas before John Calipari moves over. And now I think the biggest question around this program is Jerome Tang on the hot seat and is entering his 4th year? Like, is there even more pressure to win now, or else, be in a position where they're reevaluating whether they're going to keep you? I know there's an extensive buyout for Coach Tang, and I know that's part of the conversation, but we're looking at a coach who, his first year and maybe the tremendous amount of success in year one almost is kind of coming back to bite him a little bit, because that team was, they won 26 games. They earned a 3 seed. They made it to the Elite Eight. That was one of the most fun teams. Marquise Noel was an incredibly fun player to watch. And that was Jerome Tang's really welcome to college basketball, having been a longtime assistant at Baylor. But then the next year, they only win 19 games. They missed the tournament. And then last year, like we said, ups and downs, but they finished with only 16 wins. So trending in the wrong direction right now. And as you alluded to earlier, I think a big part of this is you're not meeting expectations for a program that has high expectations for their basketball program and always has, but also you have what seems to be an extensive NIL budget and the ability to spend large amounts of money. We know that Coleman Hawkins was, very publicly an expensive player for this program to acquire last year, and they made many other acquisitions in the transfer portal. And now coming into this year, they spent, quite a bit of money on what looks to be another great transfer portal class. And so at some point, if your boosters and your donors and everybody's willing to throw millions and millions of dollars at you to build a basketball roster, you got to win with it. And to me, it feels like, I know this program doesn't want to spend a lot of money to let him go if they end up going that direction, but he's got to get this team to the big dance, or else I think that question is going to be a big one this offseason.
Yeah, I think they did a complete 180 shift on, focusing on what they were doing this offseason with bringing in new players. And I know we're going to discuss them in the future, but I think the mentality of how Jerome Tang feels about the transfer portal and the expectations of those players he brought into the portal is going to be a different feeling. But I'm glad you brought up that Arkansas job, because the fact that he was a candidate of that brought in a new contract extension that's now through 2031. And also because of that, the expectations, Jerome Tang, if he does falter a little bit, that is a lot of money. As you mentioned, the buyout right now, if they decided to make any changes before April of 2026, meaning the end of this season, would be $18.7 million. That's just absolutely insane for a program like Kansas State to probably even decide on doing. I think if you had to make that buyout decision, that would mean multiple things, meaning you probably move on from your athletic director and Gene Taylor as well, because that's just a huge mistake if you feel like you're at that point in time. Now that number begins to drop annually from there. It goes to 15.75 the next year, 12.75, 9.7, you name it, but that's still a very large number. That contract is very favorable for Jerome Tang. So I think he's going to be around for the long term unless he decides to move on personally, at least for a little bit while this number stays significantly high. So the best point is to get on board and hope that he can get these new transfers on the same page. He did bring in some new coaching staff, Matthew Driscoll, who I think is a huge energy guy. I think he's going to have the keys to the offense, which I think is going to be the best thing. And if things work out right, and Driscoll is leading that offense, something that was struggling last year, I think this team can be a contender, dare I say, in the Big 12.
Well, you mentioned Driscoll, and I think that's a phenomenal point to make here, because the difference for this team last year was very clearly offensively. KenPom had this team 65th in the country. It had them defensively. Their adjusted defensive efficiency was 36. They were a top 40 defense in college basketball last year, but their adjusted offensive efficiency was 125th. That will not get it done in the Big 12 when you play the likes of Houston and Texas Tech and Iowa State and so on and so forth. If your offense is not humming along, you are going to struggle. And what we saw from Jerome Tang this offseason, not only bringing in Driscoll, who is the head coach at North Florida, who's a very good offensive-minded coach, but you also bring in transfers who seemingly fit what Jerome Tang wants to do, what Driscoll wants to do. You have more outside shooting, which was a big problem for this team last year. And Christian, that's where I want to go now. I want to talk about this roster. We're going to talk plenty about PJ Haggerty because he is the biggest hinge for this team and quite possibly for Jerome Tang's future in Little Manhattan. So we're going to talk about him. We're going to talk about the rest of this roster and new faces for Kansas State coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, you need to know that your favorite neighborhood spots, well, they run on Square. There are certain businesses that truly make the neighborhood feel like home, whether it's that local sports bar that's packed on game days, the coffee shop that knows your order by heart, or the corner deli that's been serving your community for decades. These are the places that bring people together. And when neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood thrives. And what does supporting a community look like? Well, it's spending money there. It doesn't just help the business, it supports the people behind it and the community around it. Those local spots are what make the neighborhood feel like home, and so many of them run on Square. Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/lockedoncollege to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. You'll be happy you did. Square, see you in the neighborhood. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. College football is here, and I could not be more excited, folks. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's nothing like it. But let's be real, actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see, that's what you pay. Honestly, it's faster, it's cheaper, and it's less stressful than any other way that I've bought tickets. And I love that you can find the views from your seat right in the app. We're talking Kansas State. You can start getting tickets for their basketball games as well. They're hosting Missouri in an exhibition game on October 24th. And folks, tickets on Game Time, just $29 to see a really fun preseason matchup. Folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets by using Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. All right, folks, still here with Christian Rao of Locked On Kansas State, still talking about Jerome Tang and the Wildcats for our team preview here. We talked about last season for Kansas State, finished around 500, had a lot of peaks and valleys throughout the year, big roster overhaul after hoping to build kind of more of a continuity style. That didn't work out for the team. They do have 4 players returning from last year's roster, but frankly, only 2 of them who are really significant contributors, only 2 who average more than 10 minutes per game. That would be CJ Jones, who, it's worth pointing out, did in fact enter the transfer portal and then opted to return to Kansas State. He averaged about 5.5 points per game last year in about 20 minutes. And then David Castillo coming back 2.5 points in about 10 minutes per game. But Christian, it's really more about the transfer portal additions. Got some international guys coming in, a pair of freshmen, or a freshman and a junior college player coming in as well. But this is a tremendous, on paper, transfer portal class for Jerome Tang and the Wildcats. You get PJ Haggerty coming over from Memphis, one of very few All-Americans returning to college basketball this year. You get Nate Johnson from Akron, Marcus Johnson from Bowling Green, Kamari McGriff from UNC Wilmington, and Abdir Bashir from Monmouth. A lot of shooters, a lot of scorers, a lot of talent in that transfer portal class. Christian, what do you make of the group that Jerome Tang's bringing in via the transfer portal this year?
Yeah, overall, you have to compare it to how you feel about last year's portal compared to this. That's like my first mindset. And I think the talent is there. Last year, I thought about how great the talent was. This year, I feel like it has talent, but it also has fit when it comes to Jerome Tang and it comes to Coach Matthew Driscoll. Those are the two, of course, I'm thinking about because of that offensibility that they so drastically missed last season. Now, some of these players, with the exception of Nate Johnson, who was the MAC Defensive Player and Player of the Year, are a little bit on the downside of defense. But as you mentioned, when you talk about KenPom and net rankings and things like that on the defensive side, I've never really been worried about a Jerome Tang defense. So I think he'll be able to get those players up to speed. What I have been concerned about is them being able to shoot the basketball, them being able to make sure they can find a way to score points. Matthew Driscoll's teams at North Florida, averaged over 80 points a game. So you hope that translates with all these new transfer guys. The energy that we've seen from practice videos and clips and stuff seems like that's absolutely there, especially what they just had what they call Shark Week this past week. And it's exciting stuff. I really like what, of course, PJ Haggerty brings to the roster. He's already getting underrated, finishes the season 3rd in college basketball with 21.7 points. Torvik put out some rankings of the top 25 of who they predicted to be scoring next year, and PJ Haggerty was nowhere to be found. So I think he should take that with a nice chip on his shoulder under Jerome Tang's scoring and under Jerome Tang's new program and become another All-American type player. Jerome Tang talked about his first press conference this past Monday and discussed how he wants to take the next step when asking about PJ Haggerty and what you expect from him. And he's like, look, I'm pretty sure he wants to play at the next level. So there's going to be a lot of things that we focus and rely on him for. That's exciting stuff when you hear that, knowing that you have NBA caliber players on your roster. And I don't think he's the only one. That's an exciting part for Kansas State.
The PJ Haggerty thing is interesting to me because it feels like Kansas State and Coach Tang in particular is a really good fit for what Haggerty is. I mean, we've seen this smaller guards who love to have the ball in their hands, who are just kind of very ball dominant, score first guards, have really thrived under Coach Tang. Obviously, Marquise Noel was a recent example. We talked about him in Tang's first year. Tyler Perry was a transfer from North Texas a couple of years ago who was great. And I know that Doug McDaniel had his ups and downs, and that was kind of part of the issue last year. But I think ultimately the track record, as small as the track record is for Tang as a head coach, but the track record's very good with these kinds of players. And with PJ Haggerty already having demonstrated that he can put the ball in the hoop better than almost anybody in the sport, he now has an extra year. He's now playing for a coach who has already succeeded with this type of player, and now effectively an offensive coordinator in Driscoll who has succeeded offensively as well. It feels to me like the pieces are coming together. And on top of all of that, you also have more shooting, which means more floor spacing, which means more driving lanes, ideally, for Haggerty to get to the cup to be able to score that way. I would be fairly surprised if he didn't average at least like 19 a game. And the only way it's less than that is if either he regresses massively, which I think would be very surprising, or if there's a more egalitarian offensive set, in which case that's probably good news for this team. It's great news for somebody like Nate Johnson or Bashir or some of those other guys, maybe even one of their international additions to kind of score more points. But I think Haggerty's going to be doing a whole lot of scoring. I was surprised by Bart Torvik's system not putting him as a top 25 scorer in college basketball, because, yeah, I feel like he's set up to be, if not the leading scorer in the Big 12, a top 2 or 3 scorer by points per game. And it's maybe only if like Darren Peterson goes crazy at Kansas that he's not the leading scorer in this conference this year.
Yeah, I assume that he's probably going to make preseason first team for the All Big 12. Who knows if he's the preseason player of the year? I doubt that's the case because of Texas Tech, how well and how far they went this past season. But one thing that resonates to me from last season from Jerome Tang, and it happened when they were about to play the Jayhawks, and he talked about how important it was to have a point guard on the court where he could act like another coach, and where you could have that leadership and that type of ability. And maybe it was a shade towards Doug McDaniel, or maybe it was just the fact of how his coaching schemes and fundamentals were. But the fact that they brought in PJ Haggerty, and he's already talking about his leadership, he's already talking about how he can play at the next level. That should make you excited if you're a Kansas State fan.
One area that I would be remiss if we didn't talk about on this team, that if there's going to be a spot that might be a concern for Kansas State this year, to me, it's the front court. And I think that's just the lack of size, or the lack of size for players who have college basketball experience is pretty obviously there. I mean, we talked about the transfer portal class. Pretty much all those guys are wings. Kamari McGriff's kind of a small ball 4 of sorts, but this team did not get a waiver approved for Tyreek Smith, who they brought in via the transfer portal. Tyreek Smith's a guy who played a whole bunch of college basketball in his career, spent a whole bunch of time in the Big 12 at Texas Tech and Oklahoma State, spent some time at SMU as well, was at Memphis last year, but transferred right before the season began. Was expecting to get a waiver for approval this year, did not get that waiver. So now, to me, the depth in the front court is a pretty major concern. I think you have you got some international guys coming in. You got a junior college transfer in Stephen Osei, who's the 6th ranked player from the junior college level, but he's like a 6'9" center, so he's not super big either. Doreen Bucca coming over from Italy. He's huge, really, really big player, but we haven't seen him play at this level, and he's one of your only real bigs on the roster. So that would be the one thing where, especially in this conference, when you're going up against a JT Toppin at Texas Tech, when you're going up against Houston's array of very talented front court players, when you're going up against bigs at Iowa State and these other teams in this conference, I worry that there's not enough just oomph and size in the front court for this Kansas State team.
Yeah, I think it's a fair criticism, and I absolutely agree with you. Look, there's 2 things that were the biggest problem for Kansas State last year. One was rebounding in general, defensive and offensive side. It limited their offensive scoring chances. The second one is the fact that they just didn't start off strong. Their first 4 minutes in the game were dreadful almost the entire season. But when you're looking at that defensive side, rebounding, making sure you can have some type of big presence, that really wasn't answered this season. They were hoping that Tyreek Smith could be that answer, at least to help that. But I think we're going to see some sort of a revolving door, a big rotation when it comes to that. I think Moby Ike Garuke, one of the returners for Kansas State, is going to be someone that pops in there. Jerome Tang talked about his athleticism and kind of mentioned him by name in his first press conference. Maybe that's just because he is aware of him because of where he was last year, or because he has a bigger presence. You talked about Doreen Buka. He's a late addition, but they really wanted him. And there's a lot of exciting stuff from him, that international player. Stephen Osei, his initial plan, and I don't know if this is because of the Tyreek Smith news or if this changes because of the news, was to redshirt him and not actually play him at all this year. Like, that was the intention when he was announced that he was coming over to the squad. Not sure if that's going to change because of the Tyreek Smith news, or if that is still the answer. So it doesn't sound like that's anything to fully rely on him. But either way, with him, McGriff, Buka, I think you're going to have a revolving door, and you're going to really have to rely on the rest of those small guards to get it done for this offense.
Last thing to talk about here before we get into the schedule and make some predictions for this team is just kind of looking at some potential X factors or kind of maybe names that haven't popped or that we haven't talked about much yet that might be big time players for this team. I'll mention quickly Andre Kostic from Serbia, 4-star international player. I know there's a lot of hype here. Read some preseason articles, hear Jerome Tang talk about him. Like, there's some serious interest in what Kostic is going to be able to do on the wing for this team. Obviously, international players flooded college basketball this year at so many different programs, but this is kind of one of the more underappreciated additions that I think could be if he's really good right away for this team on the wing, along with Johnson and Bashir and the new additions. I think that could really, really help this team.
Yeah, Elias Rapik too, I think, is also going to be really good. But Andre Kostic, there's thought process inside the program, when it comes to fan base, and what I've heard from a couple other people on the outside as well, that they think there's a strong possibility that Kostic could be a one and done type of player inside the Kansas State program, which is exciting. Again, that's how I kind of leaned to, where he thought that PJ Haggerty wasn't the only player that is believed to have NBA talent. I think Kostic is one of those guys as well. I think he's going to deliver some big plays on the wing. I mean, losing guys like Hawson last year, you got to find a way to get that wing going. I don't know if he's going to be your true shooter. I think there's a couple other players on the roster that's going to do that. But there's a lot of excitement for this roster. And going back to what I said at the very beginning of this segment, Andy, it's talent and fit. And I think that is the most exciting thing that you can take for if you're a Wildcats fan heading into the season.
Well, Kansas State's got their work cut out for them in a very, very talented Big 12. We're going to talk about how this team might do in the conference and whether Jerome Tang will lead this team back to the NCAA tournament. We'll give you our thoughts and predictions coming up in just a second. But first, folks, Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS top safety pick awards than anyone else. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details, and Mazda brings the same intention to how they craft every model. You can feel that incredible Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Nappa leather upholstery. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Because with Mazda, everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. Like our players, Mazda sweats every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. All right, folks, closing out the show, continuing our conversation here about Jerome Tang and the Kansas State Wildcats. We talked about last year and the unfortunate trajectory of Coach Tang as he has won fewer and fewer games each of his first 3 years in Kansas State. We talked about this new look roster, 10 players coming in, including All-American PJ Haggerty, how the pieces might fit together for this program. Now we're going to take a look at their schedule. We're going to take a look at how they might do in the Big 12. And Christian, one of the things that Isaac and I, my co-hosts on Locked On College Basketball, have talked about quite a bit in the last couple of years is that Big 12 teams, and it's not exclusive to the Big 12, but a lot of Big 12 teams are playing very, very cupcakey non-conference schedules as a way to kind of boost their net ranking by blowing out bad teams and then going into conference play with a whole bunch of teams ranked highly in the net. I don't really see that as being the situation here for Kansas State. It's certainly not like Duke's level of non-conference schedule where they're playing every good team they can, but I like this schedule for Jerome Tang's team. We got a couple of fun exhibition games. They're playing Missouri, then they're playing Newman, which is a non-D1 school. Then after that, they got a couple bye games, but then they host Cal out of the ACC on November 13th, and then they'll play in Kansas City. They'll play Mississippi State on November 20th, and then either Nebraska or New Mexico the following day. After that, they got a true road game at Indiana on November 25th, and they host Seton Hall on December 6th. They're at Creighton on December 13th. Those are kind of the highlights of this schedule, but I think a good mix here. 2 true road games against very good top 25 caliber teams. Some good home games mixed in there as well. This is a schedule that, for a team that has so many new faces, I think we'll do a good job of preparing them for the Big 12 slate without overwhelming them with too many talented teams right out of the chute either.
Yeah, it's one thing to prepare for the Big 12 slate, but also you have to have a strong non-conference play, because that was the dagger of last year, Andy. Mm-hmm. That was the reason why they didn't really make the dance or the tournament. Mm-hmm. They were out of it before Big 12 play even started because of their laxical when it comes to their non-conference play. I do like this schedule as well. It's definitely tougher than it was last season, but they're going to be tested, and that's a huge thing. And if you believe in this team, if you believe in the talent and the fit of this roster, then that's a strong thing to be. Jerome Tang was asked about the non-conference schedule in his initial press conference this past Monday, especially the 2 games on the road between Creighton and Indiana. And he said, look, he's like, we're going to be playing multiple Big 12 teams on the road with numbers next to their names. Mm-hmm. And you have to think that Creighton and Indiana are going to be some of those teams that by the time you play them, most likely may be in the AP top 25. You're going to these tough environments. You got to prepare yourself to be in tough environments. If you can succeed in those, then you can succeed in the Big 12 and get yourself back to the dance.
Let's talk about what that's going to look like in the Big 12, because obviously this has been a conference that has had a really consistent top 3 or 4 teams. The last few years, Houston has been extraordinary since coming into the Big 12. Texas Tech has been great. Kansas has not been at that level, but there's a lot of optimism around where they're going to be now with Darren Peterson coming in. BYU has picked up in a major way. Iowa State. We'll see what Baylor looks like. There's a lot of really good teams in this league. Arizona did not even mention them. Looking at the Big 12 schedule for Kansas State, the way that it works is you have a select group of teams you only play at home, a select group of teams you only play on the road, and then 3 teams you're playing both at home and on the road for Kansas State. That'll be Kansas, TCU, and West Virginia. So certainly not an easy trio of teams to get 6 total games against. Looking at the conference, I'm kind of projecting this team to be probably not in that top 5 conversation, but they should be better than the 7, like I think they were 9th last year. They should be better than that, or at least around that this year. I kind of see them as like 9th, maybe 8th, depending what happens with some of those other teams. And that should be enough to get into the NCAA tournament. But again, as you alluded to earlier, it does depend on that non-conference slate. You can lose the Indiana game. You can lose the Creighton game. If you lose both, you're still probably okay. But at that point, you can't lose to Bellarmine. You can't lose to UNC Greensboro. You can't lose to South Dakota. Like, you can lose to Indiana and Creighton, but if you beat Seton Hall, you beat Cal, you beat Mississippi State, then you put yourself in a position where you go 500 in the Big 12, you're probably going to be dancing. That's how I'm looking at it. And I think this team is capable of doing that. Obviously, a lot of it's going to rest on Haggerty and what he's able to do. But I think that this team is set up nicely to compete, to get back to the NCAA tournament without having to, rattle off like 10 wins in a row or anything like that in order to get there.
Yeah, don't get me started on the 3 opponents that you get to play both. I mean, it's cool that Kansas and Kansas State are playing each other, but the other 2 just doesn't make sense. I mean, the fact that we're not playing Iowa State twice with the historical backgrounds of Kansas State's and Baylor's program, the fact that we're not playing them twice is weird to me. But I'm with you. I think that this team's going to be tested. It all starts in a non-conference with those Creighton and Indiana games that highlight that for most. But you look at the beginning of their Big 12 schedule as well. We get that new and improved BYU team before anybody else does in the conference. That's the first game as well. That's going to be a great way to be tested with one of the top guys in all of recruiting. And of course, a guy like Richie Saunders, they kind of put a dagger in our season last year in that trip out to Utah, between Utah and BYU. So that's going to be a fun game. And then Arizona's at the beginning of that schedule too. I'm sure you've seen it. That non-conference schedule Arizona has is insane. It is, I mean, if you talk about teams that are going to be tested, Arizona is certainly going to be tested in their neutral site and non-conference schedule games so far this season. But I'm with you. I think they sit right around the middle of the pack in the Big 12, and I think that's respectable if they can find themselves at 500 in the Big 12. That's my expectation. That's my hope that they get to. I mean, 9-9 or 10-8 inside the Big 12, I think is definitely enough to get to the dance. And after missing it 2 years in a row, I don't even care if they got to go to Dayton, Andy. They just got to get there.
Yep. I project them at 10-3 in the non-con is what I put together. And then 10-8 in conference play. If they do that, Christian, if they do that, they're 20-11. To me, that's an NCAA tournament team. I would be very surprised.
That's probably
I would be very surprised if that team gets left out. I think they would probably be an 8-9 seed, maybe a 10 seed, but this team should be higher than a play-in if they win 20 games. If you're 19, if you're 9-9 in conference play, or if you're 9-4 in the non-con, then maybe you start to get towards that play-in type territory. But for me, quickly before we wrap up here, I kind of put down my ceiling floor type projections for this team. I think the ceiling for this team is truly capable of finishing top 5 in the Big 12. And that's not an easy task by any stretch with those teams, those aforementioned teams. If they get to that level, that's because PJ Haggerty is not only an All-American, he's arguably the best player, the best scorer in college basketball. He needs to be that guy for this team to hit their ceiling. Kostick probably needs to be that one-and-done caliber player for them to hit their ceiling. If those guys do that, if Johnson and Bashir light it up from 3 and just clear the driving lanes for Haggerty, this team could be, a 5 seed, 6 seed in that conversation, maybe making a Sweet 16. And there's nobody talking about Jerome Tang's job security at the end of the year. The floor for this team, much lower than that. With a team with this much newcomers, with this many new faces, the floor is 12th in the Big 12. Something like that. 13th, 14th would be like the absolute bottoming out floor. And that would just be if everything went completely haywire. Haggerty's not that guy. The front court's just not big enough, not experienced enough. The pieces don't fit together. And that's the situation where you are starting to wonder, is $18 million worth it to potentially move on and find a new coach? I think of all the teams we've talked about, Kansas State's floor and ceiling feel very, very wide because it's such a new look roster. And because we've seen Tang already have the highs and the lows of the lows in his just pretty short coaching career. But I think this team ultimately ends up somewhere in the middle of that. Obviously, I think they end up in that 8-9 seed conversation. And like you said, for yourself and probably for many others, just getting back to the tournament and finishing 500 or so in the Big 12 is probably going to feel like at least a sigh of relief, if not good, for this team going forward.
Yeah, I think even if you had a first round exit in the NCAA tournament, fans are going to look back and say, hey, look, at least we're back. At least we're back into that conversation. We're not talking NIT. We're not talking the crown. We're talking about the NCAA tournament. I'm with you. I don't see that floor. I know that there's that possibility, but I feel like the talent on this roster and the fit is much better than what was there last year. And that's not where they were last year. So I agree that could happen. I'm just not there in my mindset. Talking about the ceiling, though, you'd have to win probably 2 out of 3 games against Houston, Iowa State, and Texas Tech. 2 of those 3, maybe even 1 at the minimum. And then you got to at least split with Kansas to be in that conversation in top 5.
Yeah. Not only split with Kansas, you got to sweep TCU and West Virginia, which is doable but like nobody likes to go to Morgantown. At least you guys don't have the Utah trip that, as you mentioned, it tripped you up last year. It trips up a lot of teams, but you got both those teams at home. So maybe you can get a couple W's out of that. Christian, thank you so much for joining me today. Love talking Kansas State hoops. Love talking Big 12 basketball. This was a lot of fun. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for us today. Our 21st team preview. Like we said, we got 10 or so more of these coming up. We got 1 more this week. Then Isaac and I will be back with you all on Friday to get you ready with Big East Conference preview. Should be a fun one there as well. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Cheers to the Wild Popes. Let's go, Mick Bruins. And until next time, peace out.